Welcome to another edition of Progressive Community Media. I'm John Riley, today's host. Again, we're going to talk on this program about some of the internal politics of radio station WBAI New York. And as a way of just giving full disclosure, I want to inform you that I'm also a member of that board. I'm elected as a staff representative. WBAI, the non-commercial radio station that airs diverse and progressive programming, serving a wide range of communities and movements, has a local governing board that's elected by its staff and listener supporters. 3/4 of the seats are held by listeners, 1/4 by staff, including the program hosts who are considered unpaid staff. For most of the last 7 years, the Justice and Unity campaign has been a minority, with 11 seats to the independents, now known as Indy Caucuses, 13 seats. But even with that majority, Indy Caucus couldn't always get their people to come to the meetings. So, to block action, one thing that they've done over and over again has been to boycott meetings. Outside the May 2014 local station board meeting, they did it again. However, at that time, one of their number, a LSB member and also who was elected to become a Pacifica National Board member, which actually controls the licenses, she had a pointed disagreement with one of her colleagues, R. Paul Martin, who's a host of a radio show and is also on the local station board. Manajay Sava said that they should all go in and talk with Justice and Unity campaign. And at the end of this conversation, you'll hear my voice urging both of them to come into the meeting.
When we dismiss other people, we are dismissing ourselves because we don't become part of the process. Come on.
No, I'm talking to folks and other folks have different ideas.
Talking to myself never helps. Only I can, listen, you can make peace by talking to your enemies. And these people are not, nobody here is enemy. We have difference of opinion, our strategy and tactics, but let's work with each other, come on.
Well, I for one am trying to. I'm trying to convince everybody to look at it my way.
Okay, but
we'll
no.
see.
Well, then go inside.
No, you
That's
can't
the way
have
to
it
do
your
it.
way.
I get to stand here if I feel like it.
No, okay, hold on.
So you're boycotting?
I'm talking to people.
Okay, hold on.
And I don't need you here.
Elections are always contentious. During this year's election, which began in August 2015, the Justice and Unity campaign, which is a multiracial coalition dedicated to diversity on all sides of the microphone, as well as a thorough program for station sustainability, competed against a predominantly white grouping calling itself Indy Caucus. The latter group has held the board for the majority of the last 7 years, and over that time the station has gone into extreme crisis. Over that time the membership has dropped by 50%, and listenership has been likewise reduced greatly. While controlling the board, the Indy Caucus has blocked the required yearly evaluation of the general manager or the program director, and there have been several over the course of these last few years. And this is a duty that's mandated by the Pacifica National bylaws. In 2013, 3/4 of the paid staff at WBAI were laid off because of the disastrous state of the finances. Half of the WBAI Local Station Board's 24 seats were up for election this year, and the results of that election were announced on January 13, 2016. The Justice and Unity campaign won 5 of 9 listener seats and got 62% of that block. On the staff side, Justice and Unity Ally won 1 of the 3 seats, and together with the Justice and Unity campaign members on the continuing half of the board, that meant that the election resulted in a 50-50 split between the Justice and Unity campaign and the Indy Caucus. This group has gone under many names over the last 15 years. It's been variously Independents, ACE. Prior to that, it was called List Prog. But now it's all Indy Caucus. And they used a slick, expensive mailing in 2008 that Justice and Unity charged were filled with falsehoods. But they won. And soon thereafter, the Indy forces obtained a majority on the national board of the parent Pacifica network. And within a few months, the Indy Caucus aligned national management fired program director Bernard White and reassigned then general manager Tony Riddle, both progressive black managers who had supported diverse community programming. Fast forward to January 2016, the Indy Caucus, after losing their majority in this 50-50 stalemate, instead of working with the Justice and Unity campaign and their allies to save WBAI, they instead decided to again boycott 2 local board meetings in a row. At the first meeting, they assembled outside of the meeting room and just refused to come in. Under the Pacifica bylaws, a majority of the board members are required to be present to have a full meeting where decisions can actually be made. That number, that quorum number, is 13 of the 24 seats. While 18 members of the board had come to the meeting, 8 refused to come in, thus denying a quorum to the meeting, and no business could be done. Next, you're going to hear a little bit of sound from some of the conversations that occurred in the hallway. The sound's a little low, so you'll have to listen carefully. But you'll hear them talking about how that there wasn't going to be a quorum in that room. Remember, they're only a few feet away.
You do a roll call in there, you won't get a quorum.
They want it both ways.
That's what Sean is doing.
Later in that same discussion, R. Paul Martin, who's the leader of the so-called Indy Caucus, was enraged and began discussing boycotting the meetings and suing the financially weak station and Pacifica Network. According to Pacifica's bylaws, if the board doesn't have a quorum, it can still set a future meeting date. That date was set for 2 weeks later on Wednesday, January 27th. And that was going to be the annual election of officers and 4 National Pacifica Board representatives from WBAI. And that Pacifica National Board is composed of 22 people, and it makes all the really important decisions for the entire network. If the representatives weren't elected, the station might not have any votes at the meeting. So it was important that a second meeting be held in January. But Indy Caucus leader R. Paul Martin decided to call a meeting of the body that elects the Pacifica representatives for the night before the already scheduled January 27th meeting, even though the Indy Caucus didn't have a majority. He set up a sham meeting without notifying all the new Justice and Unity members, and despite knowing that several members had schedule conflicts. At this so-called delegates meeting, the Indy Caucus illegally seated a runner-up in the WBAI staff election, Catherine Davis. To explain, Pacifica's bylaws set a term of 6 continuous years for all board members. When one member reaches her term limit in December, she was automatically replaced, as was required by the runner-up candidate from the last election, which at that point was still the 2012 election, since the 2015 election was still underway. The staff member seated happens to be a Justice and Unity ally. Thus, the Indy Caucus refused to recognize this seating and instead seated their ally, despite a specific ruling by the Pacifica National Board that the person seated in December is the legitimate holder of the seat for the next year. Nonetheless, the Indy Caucus moved forward with their sham meeting, counting the illegally seated Mrs. Davis as their 13th member, thus sufficient, they claimed, to form a quorum. R. Paul Martin chaired the meeting.
The purpose of this meeting is the election of directors. We'll elect 1 staff and 3 listener directors. I'm sure that there's going to be disagreements, and I suspect that some things related to the governance of WBAI are going to be the subject of lawsuits, in which case the outcomes of these lawsuits will determine what happens. So I am ruling that I'm seating Catherine Davis as a staff rep because the PNB overstepped its bounds in trying to create a one-year seat.
Then, fake elections were held.
If they want to see it in court, they'll have the ballots.
Okay, yes, please put them in here. All right, that means that Robert Young, Alex Steinberg, and Frank Lefevre have been elected as directors. Congratulations.
Listener directors.
Listener directors.
Give ourselves a little.
Staff directors.
I mean, I'll give you this test because I don't know.
The next night, at a legitimately called local station board meeting, again, there was no quorum because the Indy Caucus had again boycotted the meeting, thus leaving Justice and Unity one member short of a quorum. At that meeting, the Justice and Unity campaign half of the local station board also introduced the newly elected and certified members and also explained what the issues were.
Good evening, I'm Evan Charles.
Good evening. Evan Charles is a well-rooted in Pacifica. For some of you who have been listening to Pacifica BAI from the 70s, his mother was Pepsi Charles. She had the program Nuances. She is one who brought on such luminaries as Ilambe, also Samori, and Bernard White. My name is John Brinkley. I'm the current chair. I just got re-elected, and interested in seeing that this board becomes very functional because it's needed.
Hi, I'm Bob Lederer. I'm a staff representative on the board, just in this most recent round, re-elected for 1 year left on my term before I reach term limits.
Thank you. Ralph Pointer here, first time on the board. I note that Lynn and I met for the first time in 1963 as teachers right down the street at a school on 135 and 135th and Lennox Avenue. It's Henry Highland Garnett School, and we've been fighting the struggle for community control since then, and we were successful in putting the first black principal in the system. I gotta tell it. And the first black stationary engineer, the first black contractors in the system were done right down the street. And the movement for community control moved on to IS 220, which down 201, and then over to Ocean Hill, Brownsville. And I say all of this to say we were part of the struggle for education from day one.
I'm Pauline Park, and I'm honored to have been elected with such wonderful colleagues from Vince Stewart on down. I am chair of Niagara, the New York Association for Gender Rights Advocacy, which is a transgender advocacy organization that led the campaign for the New York City Transgender Rights Law enacted in 2002. I'm president of the board of directors of Queens Pride House, which is the only LGBT community center in the borough of Queens, and I'm also coordinator of the transgender support group, which is meeting tomorrow. And I'm a co-founding member of New York City Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, which is the only LGBT-specific organization focused on challenging Israeli occupation and apartheid.
I'm the write-in candidate. They can mess with us, but they can't beat us. Lynn Stewart, very happy to be here, anxious to go forward.
See, that's the power of the ballot. Right? So I'm King Downing, newly elected, and I'm a listener rep.
So my name is John Riley, and I'm a
producer out at them, so I'm a staff representative. And I was elected 3 years ago, and it's been 3 very rough years. And it's quite disappointing to see that the other side seems to have boycotted tonight's meeting. I think it's a big power play and completely against Pacifica processes.
Okay, I can't talk any louder than this. I'm Serene Roberts, still on the board. Thanks for coming out. This is going to be a big year for BAI. It really is make it or break it. I know everyone says that every year. But if you look at the numbers, it really is. And we need to ensure that we need to continue what we clearly are serious about because we're here tonight, which is making a path forward so we can preserve BAI. BAI has a lot of important work to do. Thanks.
Okay, that was Serene Roberts. She's here with a cold and laryngitis. So, big hand for Serene for coming out.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, so now, basically, we have an open meeting. There is a lot going on, both here locally and nationally. Our national representative is Serene, and she's a wealth of information. Unfortunately, her voice may not permit a lot, very little, very, very little information being disseminated, although she has shared with a number of us, so perhaps someone else can share what's going on nationally. Is there anyone who would like to comment on anything going on locally?
All right, well, I just wanted to get everyone up to speed, if they're not already, about what's happened the last couple of weeks around the question of these elections and this year's local board, because there's been some very distressing developments. The first thing is that Pacifica's bylaws have a term limit built in, which is, for the same reasons sometimes in the larger election system. They're there to try to cycle people through and bring in new blood, et cetera, et cetera. So what it says is after 6 years continual service, you are automatically off the local board, and it doesn't require a vote or a resignation. It's just automatic. And just as automatic is that the person who replaces that vacancy or fills that vacancy is the next runner-up from the last election. And again, that's an automatic and immediate process. So it so happened that one of our board members, who was a staff representative, Janet Coleman, reached her 6 years of service on December 22nd, 2015, which meant that on that day, the next runner-up from the last election, which had been completed, which was the 2012 election, was automatically seated, and that person was Vajra Kilgour. Unfortunately, some of the people who aren't here tonight, some of the board members who have apparently chosen not to participate tonight, are trying to make some sort of argument that that in fact the bylaws should not have been followed, but that the board should have somehow waited 3 weeks until a new election result was in, and basically defied the bylaws and said, we're not happy with following the procedure of the last election, the runner-up in the last election. We want to wait till a future election. And the bylaws just doesn't say that. It doesn't say if there's an election going on, you wait a few weeks and see what happens. You make the transition immediately. So that's very unfortunate that they are not following the bylaws. Last week, the Pacifica National Board acted to clarify the situation because one of the board members was sending out invitations to the meeting and nominating people for the national board, including the person who was the runner-up from the most recent election, and claiming that she, rather than Vajra, was the person entitled to sit in that seat. And so last night, a group of other board members actually held a meeting to elect people to the Pacifica National Board, and using the presence of this person, Catherine Davis, who is the National Board has affirmed as of last week she is not duly seated. Vajra is duly seated. But using her presence at that so-called meeting last night, they said, well, we have quorum, it's a proper meeting, and we can elect our representatives to the National Board. Again, complete defiance of the basic language, the clear language. This is not poorly written language, ambiguous language. This is clear language in the bylaws. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's an effort to kind of achieve through manipulation what they couldn't achieve through following the rules. So that's one thing people should be aware of, that this is going on. And tomorrow night is the first seating of the Pacifica National Board for 2016. It's a conference call. And, you know, we will see what happens with these people who were so-called elected last night in a procedure that is blatantly in violation of bylaws. So that's one thing. The other...
People can tune in?
Go ahead.
Can people tune in to that, the National Board by doing what?
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, any National Board meeting that's an open meeting, if it doesn't fall into one of the allowable categories, such as confidential personnel matter or a confidential legal matter, etc., or a contractual matter, our broadcast or webcast, to be more accurate, or webcast over the website www.kpftx.org. So, I'm sorry? Yes, it's www.kpftx.org. Tomorrow night's meeting starts at 8:30 Eastern Time, and it'll be a good chance to get a sense of who the new board members are from around the country for this year. So that's one issue. The other issue I just wanted to bring to people's attention is what happened at the last meeting of this body, the Local Station Board, on January 13th, which is that there were almost all of the members of the board were physically present in the lobby just around the corner here, but more than half of them refused to come into the room that we're now sitting in, which is always the room that we've had meetings in. And they gave all sorts of excuses, but the bottom line is it was a legally scheduled meeting. Nobody questioned that it was a meeting that had been properly noticed. It's the same second Wednesday of the month that we've been meeting on for several years now, and they just didn't come in the room, so we weren't able to have quorum. But the one thing that the bylaws does say when you don't have a quorum meeting is that you can set the next meeting date, and that's how we voted by the majority of those present to meet tonight to continue our business. So it's just extremely disappointing that the other members of the board, who essentially boycotted the last meeting, have boycotted tonight's as well, preventing us from moving forward in the really vital life and death business of the station at a time that we're in severe financial crisis. So I'll shut up for now and, pass the mic.
And this is for John or for anybody. So, is this issue going to be on the agenda at the PNB meeting? The issues that were just raised about the seating and all of that, is that on the agenda for that meeting? That's the first question. And the second one is their failure to show up on the 13th, is that an unexcused absence on their part?
Well, I can answer the second question. Under the bylaws, you can only be excused or unexcused from a quorum meeting. It's recorded. There was actually a new amendment adopted last month that said when there's a non-quorum meeting, you take the roll and record who is present, but it's not counted as those who are not present are not counted as having been unexcused. Serene, are you able to address it?
I wrote to the PNB this morning, advising them that there had been this bogus meeting with a bogus seating and a bogus selection, and therefore the directors were bogus and could not legitimately be seated tomorrow. I think, unfortunately, there are people who are inclined to high drama, and unable to find it in other areas of their life, it has become BAI in Pacifica. So we undoubtedly will have some stuff in the air tomorrow when the PNB meets. Because they will show up on the call, and it'll be a mess. It'll be a waste of time. It'll be, we have work here to do locally. The PNB has more work than it can accomplish. PNB has work going back to 2 years ago that we've not been able to get to. There are things that need to be done, so I suspect there'll be a slight jam up tomorrow, and there will be, if they show up, there will be a motion to excuse them because they're not legitimate members.
You said excuse.
To excuse the madness that led to them showing up. There was another question. When Bob was talking about, well, no, you answered that. When Bob was talking about the meeting, tonight's meeting, we should point out that because the elections ran late, we had expected they would end in December, but they were extended to January because we in New York didn't have quorum, and that's never been a problem. But we didn't have quorum. The PNB on December 29th sent a letter, passed a motion saying, guys, you're going to be working with a very tight timeline in January. Go ahead, have your regular January meetings. Because in New York and Houston, we always do second Wednesdays. Go ahead and have your January meeting. But notify all the candidates now. That was, late December to be done in early January. That there's going to be a meeting sometime between the 21st and the 27th when they will be seated. That's this meeting. So that everyone knew, the chair sent a letter out, everyone knew from early January that in this week there was going to be a meeting so that we could get people to the National Board for tomorrow night. So none of this is a surprise, and the deliberate effort to not work with the rest of governance, speaks for itself.